The Judiciary moves to amend the bill on page 1 after the enacting clause by striking out the remainder of the bill and inserting in lieu thereof the following.
Are there objections to having the amendment explained in lieu of having it read? The chair hears no objection. The gentleman with 27th, Delegate Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the Judiciary Committee strike and insert amendment. Basically, the bill does two different things as it came out of the Senate. First of all, it expanded the definition of deadly weapon to include blackjack, gravity knife, switchblade knife, nunchucks, metallic or false knuckles, pistols, and revolver. And of course, firearms were initially in the bill, so basically the scope of deadly weapons is just redefined to include different means of self-defense. The other part of the bill dealt with what has come to be known as the Fair and Festival section of the bill, which basically initially eliminated the authority of a municipality to prohibit firearms at short-term outdoor events where the person has no concealed carry permit. Basically, the bill was amended to reinstate that provision, allowing the municipalities to prohibit that situation in those short-term, which I think is 14 days under the bill, period. I will say for the members that there was a good bit of discussion about this bill before it came on the agenda of the Judiciary Committee, and there were negotiations among the various interested parties that resulted in the change in the bill when it came out of the Judiciary Committee. And I also would say that as a result of those negotiations, the debate was significantly limited, and those people who had concerns about that fairs and festival provision did not get engaged in the debate based upon the agreement of the parties to remove that from the bill. So that's the summary of the strike and insert amendment. Mr. Speaker, I urge its adoption.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman with 27th. Are there amendments to the amendment?
Delegate D. Jeffries moves to amend the strike and insert on page 4, section 5A, line 67, following the word municipality by striking the following language.
The gentleman from the 40th, Delegate Jeffries, to explain the amendment. Are there objections? There are no objections. The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this amendment is simply code cleanup to bring the law up to date after the passage of constitutional carry several years ago. If you'll notice on your desk, you do have a memo. The NRA does support the amended bill using this strike-through amendment. I urge its passage.
The question before the House now is the secondary amendment. The secondary amendment as just described by the gentleman from the 40th. Are there members who wish to speak to the secondary amendment? The gentleman from the 37th, Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the amendment yield?
Does the gentleman yield for question? The gentleman does yield.
Thank you, sir. So if your amendment is adopted, right, cities like Charleston that have events like Festival or Live on the Levee where alcohol is served, one would not need a permit to carry at these events where alcohol is served here in Kanawha County, where you serve?
That is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you. I'd like to speak to the amendment.
Yes, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Believe it or not, I don't, when it comes to bills like this, I try to, I really vote for the bill based on, just on its face value, on policy issues. It is definitely not a knee-jerk reaction to gun legislation. I actually own several guns. I know how to use them. I have a dangerous job where I often carry. In fact, just about every day that I work. I'm not afraid of them. I know what most gun legislation does and what it doesn't. And I think there's been a lot of bills that have passed through here that I know that a lot of people got very worked up over, but they really didn't have much of a real detrimental result as things played out in the real world. However, and if you would bear with me for a second, I'd just like to give a little bit of a background on these preemption laws, because that is what the bill does. Before I was elected here, there was a a bill, and I believe it was in a home rule bill that precluded municipalities like Charleston, the area that I represent, from making any ordinances to regulate where people could or couldn't carry or how they were sold. And let me back up a little bit, because the reason that Charleston first did this was back in the 80s. We had a real problem when I was in high school. We had a real problem with a drug for gun trade that was going on here, and it was leading to a lot of violent incidents in our municipalities. I can speak for Charleston because that's where I grew up here. And what was going on, groups from outside the state were coming here where there wasn't a whole lot of gun regulation, and purchasing large amounts of weapons to take back to urban areas in other states, mainly, and we're bringing drugs down, and that's what, in exchange for it. So it increased a lot of our drug problems here in Charleston, and created a lot of turf battles that were going on back in the mid-'80s here in Charleston, and there were a lot of violent crimes as a result of it. So Charleston passed these ordinances, and they worked. There was a drop in gun violence in Charleston for a good length of time here, until I believe in 2014, when this body voted to take that ability away from municipalities to adopt these types of ordinances for themselves, for duly elected city councils and mayors who have to answer to the people also. It took that ability away from them to pass these ordinances for themselves, even though we had one in place for like 20 years or so more that was working. So when we have a lot of bills that come just about every year, there's some sort of gun bill. Some have consequences. Some have less than we hear that they do. That one in particular had major consequences in the district that I represent. So a little bit of time we've kind of chipped away at that and taken certain things away. But what this amendment does, it says that at events where alcohol is served, that a duly elected city council and mayors can't have any regulation over who can carry, how they carry at events where alcohol is served. So I would like for you to just use some common sense here, because I realize that, with gun ordinances, they're not going to, if somebody has an intent to do harm, a gun ordinance is not going to prevent them from doing that. I realize that, okay? But if somebody doesn't go out with the intent to do harm, but they're going to an event that serves alcohol, okay, and they drink a little bit too much and they get into an argument, they might not have left the house intending to do harm, but harm might be done because we're now throwing guns into the picture. I think cities should be allowed to regulate their own festivals in a reasonable manner. And I think it's not unreasonable to say that you at least have to have a permit to carry at this outdoor festival where alcohol is served and consumed. We all want to see West Virginia move forward. And we all want to bring people to this state. We all want more people, businesses, more job opportunities for our kids, so our children and grandchildren can live here, work here, stay closer to home. If we're going to grow West Virginia, it's going to be done through our cities. And if you keep passing legislation aimed directly at population centers, you're doing a great disservice to this state. We have an election here in Charleston. Just last cycle, we had an election. We have a duly elected mayor. We have a duly elected city council. If they propose any ordinance that the people don't like, the people can speak up and they can vote them out. But you know what? It has never been an issue. This has never been an issue in a municipal election. The one time that it was actually was a gentleman that was supported by several members of this body who ran against a Republican mayor in a primary, and he got his clock cleaned. In fact, the people in this body that supported him, I don't see them here anymore either. So when you want to get up and talk about local control, when we're talking about education bills, and get up and talk about local control when it comes to other issues, how about allowing our mayors and our city councils, especially in our larger municipalities, to do their job? They got to answer to the people too. And they'd like to keep their citizens safe, and not from people who, I'm not talking about people who are leaving the house intending to do harm. I'm talking about people who go to Live on the Levee or to festival or any festival that you have in a municipality that you may or may not represent, where alcohol is served and alcohol is drank, and tempers can flare sometimes, and sometimes fights occur, and it would be a lot safer if people were less armed at these events. So please reject the gentleman from Kanawha's amendment.
The gentleman from the 32nd, Doug Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman of Judiciary yield for a question?
Chairman does yield.
Thank you. I just want
Yes.
a clarification. So if we adopt your amendment and not the gentleman from the 40th Amendment, then the language would stay in the bill that prohibits carry at one of these fairs and festivals upon the action of the municipality unless the person has a concealed permit.
To the gentleman, that is correct.
Okay.
Yes. It appears to me that the gentleman from the 40th Amendment is intended to reinstate the language that was made by agreement in the Committee on the Judiciary.
Okay, thank you. Speak to the amendments.
The gentleman from 32nd is recognized.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I support the amendment from the gentleman from the 40th. We passed constitutional carry. This language, if it is stricken, reverses that. And as we have heard today, I don't think guns are the problem. Perhaps it's alcohol. I mean, we have made it so that alcohol can basically pour from every corner of every building in the city and now the state. So I don't think guns are the problem. It's alcohol. I would support the amendment from the gentleman of the 40th. Thank you.
The gentleman of the 27th, Doug Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to speak against this amendment for two reasons, basically. And I want everyone to understand how the bill got in the posture that it's in. Oftentimes, chairs of committees, when they learn that there is a contentious issue, will encourage the parties, those that are stakeholders, to discuss the issue and see if they can come to an agreement on how the issue would be resolved. And that's exactly what happened in this case. There were discussions with various individuals and various entities, groups, about this bill, and ultimately the agreement was reached and communicated to me that the bill would come before the Judiciary Committee, that we would reinstate language that was stricken, which is now apparently the subject of this amendment, is to basically strike it back out, and that that matter would not be debated. And that's the important thing. This language was not debated in the Judiciary Committee because the parties had agreed that the language would be reinstated. And so basically the amendment was made and it was not discussed. Neither side had any ability to discuss the pros and cons of it because it was an agreement. So that's the first reason that I have to oppose the amendment, because we didn't have a chance to develop this issue. We don't really know how it would have turned out if each side had the ability to express their views on the issue. The second reason that I oppose this amendment, I think it undermines the very process that we try to encourage here, which is to try to work some of these disputes out without consuming a great deal of committee time. And I would suggest to you that although I won't be back next year, that if you're a committee chair in the future, it's going to be hard to put a lot of confidence in an agreement that's been represented as having been negotiated and upon which you rely. And that's exactly what happened in this case. And so I urge that for those two reasons, and for really the greater good in going forward as a deliberative body, and the benefits that come from negotiating these type of arrangements, that you reject this amendment.
The gentleman of the 58th, Doug Coles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I find myself in a unique position sometimes. I have family members who are members of law enforcement, and I know there are some law enforcement folks in the room. It is clear that I certainly prefer permit carry. If you're going to carry in West Virginia, I would encourage you to get a permit. I think it's been the will of this House to prefer permit carry. We're trying to lower the fee. We're trying to give you access to other areas if you have a permit. And it's even in line with the campus carry bill we passed recently, is you had access, but only if you were a permit carry. If you're going to carry a concealed weapon, you need to be proficient with your weapon. You do. On behalf of all of us, please be proficient with your weapon. You need to be safe. And you need to be a good guy. Good guys with guns make us all safer. Bad guys with guns make us all less safe. Well, how do you know the difference? Well, one way is to do a criminal background check and have you pre-cleared. If my friend is a good guy and he's been pre-cleared and he has the card, then it's a whole lot easier when he interacts with law enforcement for them to know. And for him to have extra access if he's been pre-cleared with a background check and training and proficient with his weapon. So I think there's great value as a body for us to say, it's the preference of this House for you to be pre-cleared and carry permit carry if you're going to do it. But agreeably, there are areas in how those things blend together, whether it's open carry, constitutional concealed carry, or permit carry. I think all those things coexist, but it has been the tradition here to add extra access for areas that have permit carry. This is a deviation from that. This is not code cleanup. This is a deviation of the tradition and practice we've been using to blend those things together. So I would like to say that, in certain, the question I think before us is on those street vendors, those fairs, or those street parties, those fairs and festivals, is that a sensitive area where we should allow access for those who have gone through the pre-clearance or for everyone who wants to carry? It has been extra access like campus carry, and that's probably the prudent thing to do, is leave it there, especially if that was the agreement coming out of Judiciary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman with the 62nd, Doug Bibby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to join my colleague from the 32nd and support the gentleman from the 40th Amendment. It's a good amendment. We tend to forget what we're talking about here. We're talking about law-abiding citizens. We're taking away their constitutional right. We have universal carry in West Virginia. My gentleman from the 32nd brought a good point up about the proliferation of alcohol. We could restrict the alcohol. That's not a constitutional right. But the constitutional right to be able to defend yourself, that's sacred. We can't infringe on that. Anyone can carry a gun. If a criminal's intent on shooting somebody up at an outdoor festival, this municipal ordinance isn't going to stop them. They'll go ahead and do it. The people who are going to be affected, it's the law-abiding citizen who either can't carry his gun or her gun, or doesn't carry it and is caught in a situation where you do have a criminal that takes aim and shoots people up. I think there was an incident about a little less than a year ago in California during a wine festival where this happened. So I'd like to join my colleague from the 32nd and the 40th and urge everyone to support this amendment. Thank you.
Hey, the gentleman from the 35th has raised a point of order. The gentleman may state the point.
Well, rather an inquiry, Mr. Chairman. or Mr. Speaker. I was just reviewing the contents of the strike and insert and the amendment to the amendment, and it appears that if the amendment to the amendment were adopted, we're back to the original Senate bill. So procedurally, are we, if the amendment to the amendment is adopted, are we going to strike and insert an amendment that is going to amend the bill to exactly what it was?
I'll give the chair a moment to review the primary and secondary amendments. Would the gentleman from the 40th, Douglas Jeffries, please approach the podium? House will please be in order. House will please be in order. The gentleman of the 35th has raised a parliamentary inquiry of the chair as to the effect of the adoption of the secondary amendment. The chair and the clerk and the sponsor of the secondary amendment have reviewed both the primary amendment and the secondary amendment, and the adoption of the secondary amendment would have the effect of returning the primary amendment back to what is exactly the verbatim Senate bill. Therefore, it will be the ruling of the chair that the secondary amendment will not be in order. The secondary amendment will not be in order. The primary amendment will be in order. And at this time, the chair would recognize the gentleman from the 40th, Douglas Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask to withdraw my amendment and then speak against the amendment that came out of judicial.
The gentleman may proceed.
Okay. Yes, the goal here, what we're wanting to do, is return it to the original language from which it came from the Senate, which my amendment would have done, but to simplify the process, we will withdraw and ask to speak against the amendment put in Judiciary. I urge to vote down the amendment out of Judiciary.
The question before the House still is on the primary amendment. Are there other members who wish to speak to the primary amendment? The gentleman, the 60th, Douglas Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that this is the result of an agreement that was made among a small group of people who determined that this was the most effective way to deal with it. To deal with the fact that we have limited time, we have limited opportunity to come to a conclusion. However, the conclusion that we came to was to limit the individual natural rights of citizens of this state and of this country. And for that reason, I would ask you to vote down the amendment. Thank you, sir.
The gentleman, the 27th, Douglas Porterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in rejection of the amendment based upon what my other fellow colleagues have talked about. It's a violation of the Second Amendment. Law-abiding citizens are the people that are to be protected. We cannot stop people and legislate them from being evil. However, we can protect our citizens, and we can make sure that municipalities do not override Second Amendment constitutional law for people to have the right to defend themselves. We talk about these different festivals and things that are going on. If someone's there with ill intent, and a police officer or someone that has authority is not there at the time to stop something bad from happening, who would be there to do that? The law-abiding citizen with their unalienable Second Amendment right. I urge rejection of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady in the 51st, Douglas Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment. I've heard some interesting things. Law-abiding citizens. I've heard good guy. I've heard bad guy. And once again, we back on the debate of the Second Amendment. I'm good with the Second Amendment. I am a gun owner. I do have a permit to carry. But you know, there's a couple of things about me and my family that we're seen as a menace if we carry because of different stigmas, maybe because of my beautiful year-round tan. And so we have all sorts of festivals that come to West Virginia. And we have people that sometimes don't agree with some of those festivals and fairs. And they protest these things, especially in the month of June when it's Pride Month. That seems to be when everybody comes out in droves. And so I don't understand why we would just be the Wild Wild West when we are trying to educate or maybe introduce something different to our children or our grandchildren, something that we want to celebrate our heritage with in our culture, and we just gonna let everybody bring guns. Just come on down to West Virginia. We have people that are in these fairs and festivals that is not even from this state. What message are we bringing? We're not going to have police officers at fairs and festivals. That's something you need to speak to your municipalities about. I don't think the officers would want to decide and try to figure out who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. So then what we have? We also need to consider that not all children grow up in the same households, and having a gun in their face can trigger some things that they're not accustomed to. So would our fairs and festivals also have counselors? There's some children that, because they live in HUD housing, has never seen a gun before. So what's going to happen at our fairs and festivals? Yeah, you can have your safety on your gun. Yeah, I'm not saying that you're not going to be unsafe with it. But I'm saying, can you give those folks the freedom of choice? Or are we just going to put all those folks who don't want to deal with it back home and they don't need to be out in their communities? Have you been to a pageant? Those pageant moms get very feisty. So does the parents' dads. So we're just going to let everybody come on in with their guns. This is not about alcohol. We know this. Some people use guns for intimidation. I can recite off a couple of names who had a permit while driving with their family and still got killed. I wonder what that stigma was. That person was a good guy. Philando Castile. Look him up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 40th, Doug Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since we've kind of shifted gears here to the approach on this, I'll go ahead and offer what would have been my closing now. I'm hearing basically we're going to discriminate against who's a good guy and who's a bad guy by whether they have a permit. A few years ago, we decided that everybody had the constitutional right to carry a firearm in this state. But now, we're going to change that up. Well, if they have a permit, they're the good guy. It's not right. That's discrimination. Gentleman from the 37th, my friend, said that, these are events where alcohol is served. By law right now, people are already carrying at these events where alcohol is served just because they have a permit. We are discriminating who can carry a gun by whether they have a permit. It's not right, folks. We determined that people have a constitutional right to carry a gun in this state. It's time to make the laws consistent and give everybody that right. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 37th, Dr. Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll try to be brief since I did already speak. Well, I spoke on the previous amendment that was ruled out of order. There is one place I know of in Charleston where we do regulate who can carry, whether you have a permit or not. I know of one place in particular in Charleston where you cannot carry, and you're all sitting in it. Right here, right now. So if you would like to tell the municipality that I represent, that it's going to be safer, there could be more good guys with guns if we allow permitless carry at festivals where alcohol is served, why not the same for us right here? Why not the same for us right here? If that's the safest way, so you're going to tell my duly elected mayor and duly elected city council that they can't take a simple regulation. You have to have a permit and be trained in order to carry at an outdoor festival where streets are blocked off and alcohol is served. They can't do that, but for here, you can't carry. Not in the Capitol, because you want to keep yourselves safe, but not the constituents that I represent. So I'm going to ask you once again to vote in favor of local control. Let duly elected mayors and city councils make ordinance that the people who elect them, to keep them safe, and then they get a say-so every couple of years in their municipal elections. Vote for local control. Don't tread on me.
The gentleman from the 60th, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the indulgence of the House letting me speak one more time. I'd like to reiterate something I've said maybe once or twice, which is that the only valid reason for government to exist is to protect your individual natural rights, not to keep you safe. As a matter of fact, there have recently been a couple of U.S. Supreme Court decisions which state emphatically that the police force does not exist to protect you, to keep you safe.
The government exists to protect your individual natural rights. I agree with my friend, the gentleman from the 37th. It is hypocritical for us to sit in this building where we are protected by armed guards and prevented from carrying weapons. The citizens who own this house are prevented from carrying weapons to protect themselves, and talk about how we're going to prevent those same restrictions in a municipality. I agree wholeheartedly with that, which is why I have proposed HB 2031, permitting persons who have been issued state licenses to carry concealed deadly weapons on the state capitol complex. And yes, it does say licenses, because when I first proposed it, I was told that it wouldn't get through if it didn't have the licenses in it. Personally, I'd like to go ahead and leave the licenses out. The people of this state should be free to protect themselves and to exercise their Second Amendment rights. I would appreciate anybody who wants to support that. The fact of the matter is that this body exists to protect the individual natural rights of the citizens of this entire state. And as we said with the Hilltop House bill, when the municipality is infringing upon those rights, it becomes the responsibility of this body to protect those rights by preventing the municipality from infringing upon those rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 35th, Doug Scaff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be brief as well, too. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but, it says right here in this, I totally agree with the chairman's amendment, and here's why. Because the way that I read it, it has the word may in there. It says may, a municipality may prohibit persons who do not have a valid concealed handgun, which if I read it that way, they could also choose to allow a person who doesn't have a concealed handgun permit. So we are allowing even more municipalities to have even more power to decide what they want. When you have a special event on the boulevard down here, it says right here the word 14-day temporary special event, which means it's something that doesn't happen all the time. It's unique. It's out of the ordinary. It's not common. It's a special function which requires special permits for alcohol, special permits for music, where you might have some loud music that's out of the ordinary, special permit to allow campers to park along the boulevard, special permit for everything. It's a different day, it's a different event, it's a special function. When you have a special function, if I read this correctly, we are still not allowing, even though it's a special function, we're not allowing anybody to not bring a gun as long as you have a permit for that gun. So you can still carry it. So take the extra 30 minutes or so that it takes, the extra couple hours, go get your permit, and you can carry it to that special function where everything else there and everybody else there, you have to have your food license, special permit. You have to have your music license, special permit. Everything required a special permit for a special event. So we're just being consistent because it's a special event. And we're not precluding anybody from bringing a gun there. We're just saying, hey, just go get your permit. Be consistent because it is a special event, special occasion where many more people gather than normal. So I fully support the chairman's amendment, and I applaud him on bringing people together to make a compromise. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, to close debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what's overlooked is basically the amendment restores the law as it currently exists. It allows this very limited period of time that municipalities may, as the gentleman from 35th indicated, may actually prohibit non-permit carrying individuals from carrying firearms at a concentration of individuals. Usually these fairs are highly attended. It's a very limited requirement if the municipality feels like it's necessary to protect the citizens and those who attend those events. It is current law, and I think that's the reason that the parties in good faith agreed to this originally, but have for some reason abandoned that good faith agreement. So I would urge the adoption of the amendment and ask for the ayes and nays.
The question before the House is the adoption of the primary amendment. Roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Those in favor of the primary amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, there are 27 ayes, 67 nays, 6 members absent, not voting. Less than a majority in favor. The primary amendment is lost. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 201 relating generally to criminal offenses of stalking and harassment.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill on page 1 after the enacting clause by striking out the